What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Roots. So I'm going to review the seventh album by rapper Busta Rhymes. Basically, this project is called The Big Bang and it came out in the late spring of 2006. So the thing about this particular album is this was a big deal just because this is Busta Rhymes' first album on the Aftermath imprint, which was Dr. Dre's label around that particular time. Now, he didn't have any other. Now, this was Busta Rhymes' only album under Dr. Dre's imprint as far as that particularly kind of happened, but this is still a pretty hit smash of a particular project. Definitely enjoyed this one quite a bit. This is definitely probably one of Busta Rhymes' best albums, I'd have to say. He had taken a particular kind of break between 2002's, like I think it's called It Ain't Safe No More or something like that, but Busta Rhymes was dropping like an album every year between like the mid late 90s and about early 2000s, about to 2002 or so, and then he took a pretty decent break. I want to say he did something, he had some sort of hit he did like a Flip Mode Squad album, I think in like 2003 or something. There was like an album he did kind of in between, but Busta Rhymes took a pretty decent break between 2002 and 2006. He cut off his dreads, which he was known for throughout the late 90s, and he removed it. He cut off his dreads, which he was known for in like the late 90s and early 2000s and such. And he just kind of he collaborated with Dr. Dre, and he just kind of made this like a pretty heralded project. This was kind of a big deal back in the mid 2000s when this came out. It was definitely pretty was like touted to be one of the next big ones to blow up, kind of similar to like Eminem in the Game and 50 Cent and some of those type folks. And it has a number of Dr. Dre beats on here that work pretty damn well. There's some other producers on here like Jay Dilla, who was deceased around that time. He's a pretty good producer. Swizz Beats is on here, Timbaland's on here, Mr. Porter's on here, some folks like that. It's just a good assortment of producers on here that make this pretty good. But the thing about this particular album that makes it so heralded, it's just the fact that this is an East Coast album that kind of has like some 2000s type production about it that actually is relevant to like the times where I feel like most of the times in like 2006, 2005, 2007 and such, it was more of like ringtone rap and dirty South hip hop that was kind of making the most noise. But this particular album actually was kind of a noteworthy East Coast album apart from like the folks. I mean, because just back in those days, 2005, 2006, you had folks like D4L and Rick Ross and some of those type folks, and like T.I. and like them franchise boys that were outselling folks like Ghostface Killah and Busta Rhymes and Jay-Z and Nas. So that's kind of the concept about it. But I would have to say about this particular album, this is still a pretty relevant project. This album's going to get a pretty rave score, and it did actually have the hits on here, so it's a good concept to kind of get some of these. I would have to suppose it's relevant to like the times. Busta Rhymes really has some ferocious type energy, and he's unlike most. Busta just has a certain amount of energy and draw that just makes him different from most of the folks in rap music as far as that's particularly kind of concerned. And this is no different. I mean, maybe this album is a little bit maybe this album's a little bit lighter on like sheer hits in terms of commercial quality, but I would still have to say the hits that are I would still have to say the hits that are on this particular album are still relevant to the mid 2000s and are a pretty boisterous time, I'd have to suppose. So it's a good concept to kind of get some of these. It's definitely a smash hit of an album. This particular album is not lackluster or light on hits, I'd have to suppose. This kind of the concept is just not full commercial bound. But I still think for the concept of an East Coast album, this is definitely one of the more notable East Coast albums of like the mid 2000s, considering the fact that more of like ringtone rap and southern hip hop and swag rap was more dominant around this time. But Busta Rhymes holds his own, particularly a song like Touch It or I Love My Bitch or some particular nice ones that just did a lot of damage around that time. I probably would have to say that Touch It was one of the biggest East Coast hits of like the mid 2000s. I would definitely suppose that's a pretty highlighted one. Just has a lot of ferocious energy on here. But the thing about this particular album is there's not a ton of club joints. The thing that I noticed about this particular album is a lot of this is like commerce music. A lot of this is just like standard kind of blue collar commerce and things like that. There's some Starbucks and Target kind of morning commerce on here, and there's some after hours commerce, some day after hours commerce. There's just a good assortment of things. It's interesting that Busta Rhymes kind of switched up the template and didn't just pack this album full of just like nightclub and kind of dance club kind of just because he definitely could have done that, but he didn't. It's just kind of the concept that this is kind of almost like a blue collar album. And I just didn't realize that back in the day when I used to listen to this particular project, but it's a good concept to kind of get it. So there's more songs on here that I like. There's more songs on this album that I like now than I did back in the day, I'd have to suppose. It's a good concept. But yeah, there's 4 singles. Originally, I thought there were only 2 singles off this album, but apparently New York Shit and In the Ghetto were. Originally, I thought there were only 2 singles off this album, but apparently there were 2 extra ones. New York Shit and In the Ghetto were some extra singles that came out later in the summer of 2006. They just didn't hit that heavily, I'd have to suppose, but it's a good concept. So we'll go ahead and talk about the singles on here. The first single off this album is Touch It, and this is a pretty nice one. This is like a thrilling, kind of exhilarating nightclub hopper, I would definitely have to say. This is like a shredding kind of dance cut, I would definitely feel like, and this has loads of ferocious energy off this song, I'd have to suppose, and this is just a pretty dope song. So this one is definitely, even to this day, this is one of Busta Rhymes' most highlighted hits, I'd have to suppose. This is just one that continues to resonate, and this is definitely one that's pretty relatable to like the mid 2000s type fare, and just pretty much one of the best East Coast songs out of the 2000s, I'd have to suppose, as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. This is a real kind of pounding shredding type beats. It's a real shredding type one. I think Swiss Beats particularly produced this one, so it's a pretty good highlight to kind of get from him. This is definitely something, I don't know if DMX could have handled this particular beat, but I definitely feel like this is the perfect beat for like Busta Rhymes as far as this pitch kind of happens. He just turns up the energy, really goes crazy on this particular song. There needs to be more songs by Busta Rhymes, but like there needs to be more songs by Busta Rhymes with this particular pitch, because this is just a good concept. This was just a great song out of nowhere that kind of came out of nowhere. And this is just a great song out of nowhere that kind of came out of nowhere out of the mid 2000s and just continues to resonate even now. There is a remix that was kind of that was not on this particular album that has a bunch of rappers on there like Lloyd Banks and some folks like that. But there's also one that Eminem did at a concert that I wish would have been on there as well. There was some good concepts to kind of get that. It would have been a great remix if Eminem would have remembered his verse that he did and then made that like an official remix or something. But this is still Touch It is still a pretty excellent song, I'd have to suppose. Touch It is still a pretty excellent song, I'd have to suppose. I Love My Bitch is the second single. I Love My Bitch is the second single, and this has will.i.am and Khalees on here. This is a particularly pretty modest charting song. This did pretty well back in the day, back in the summer of 2006. Definitely remember this song was a pretty good bop as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. This is like a summery kind of safari-like jaunt of a song, I'd have to say. The song just has some warm kind of carefree energy about it, I definitely feel like, and this is just kind of a hop and bop, radio-ready club bounce of a song, I definitely would have to suppose. So this is a pretty good highlighted one. This is just good for like some real summery type energy, just real kind of carefree June skies, July skies, something like that, just within that particular pitch. Just kind of, I mean, it's not really so much like a scorching song compared to like Touch It or How We Do It Over Here, some of those type ones, but it's just kind of like a nice balmy kind of day, something like that. Even like a song to listen to in May when it's like 80 degrees, 75 degrees, something like that, where the sun is out. It's just a real sunny type song. It's just a real sunny type song, and it just works pretty well. It's just Khalees works on this song pretty damn well. Definitely like the pitch of her being on this song. Also, just adds some extra benefit. And then also will.i.am does a pretty good job with it as well. So it's just a pretty good, clever type song, an original factor that just has a good, just an original type factor that's a pretty good highlight, I'd have to say. So that's a nice one. New York Shit. New York Shit is the third single. This is a pretty good highlighted one, I'd have to say. This is like a mellow, kind of breezy brunch time commerce of a song, I would definitely have to say. This is like a regular day kind of New York fare, I would feel like, and this is just a comfy kind of makeshift outing song, I would definitely say. So this is a pretty highlighted one. It's too bad that this song didn't chart, because this is definitely some good blue collar type tunes just for some New York and Philadelphia type fairs and places like that, Indianapolis, Chicago, some of those type places. It's kind of more on the East Coast with this like that big city kind of hopping, things like that. Just a good pitch to kind of have, just getting like a Subway sandwich, something like that, or a hot dog, some of those type fairs, just within the summer sky, something like this within that standard pitch. Really like the particular concept. This real good New York type fair just really works in like some good kind of big city type commotion as far as that pitch kind of has with it. It's a real nice highlighted one. In the Ghetto is another highlighted song that says Rick James on here. It's a posthumous verse. It's from his song In the Ghetto. It's from his song In the Ghetto from his 1981 album, which I think is called Street Songs. I reviewed that album last year. It's a pretty good pitch to kind of get that one. It's too bad that Rick James couldn't. I mean, Rick James died before this song came out, but it's just kind of the concept about it. It definitely would have been pretty fly if Rick James and Busta Rhymes had actually collaborated. That would have been a pretty good pitch, but it's still a pretty good song. This is like a glittery, kind of flashy city pizzazz, I would have to say. This is just a residential hopping night activity kind of song, I would definitely feel like. And this is just good for some snackage and antics just within the evening fare, I'd have to say. So it's a pretty good highlighted one. Just pretty good city stroll stuff like that. Just getting snackage and like the after hours, picking up some snacks, pizzas, things like that, bagels, just overall good concepts as far as that pitch kind of happens. Just getting like a Subway sandwich, something within that pitch, just something to kind of have for some smoke tunes. I mean, this is not as much of like a smoke tune, but definitely if you're already high as hell, something like that, you're just looking for something to munch on, some of those type things. This is a good concept to kind of have for just some night activity. I also feel like this is just some good kind of just walking around at night, some pitches like that, just getting errands done, things of that relative pitch, just good for some night commerce. Pretty good highlight just for like a glittery kind of flashy sense as far as that pitch kind of happens. Another good big city type tone. So the thing about this particular album in terms of the singles is for the most part in terms of the singles, apart from I Love My Bitch, Busta Rhymes reps New York pretty damn well on this particular album, I'd have to say, at least in terms of the singles. It definitely has some pretty good flashy pizzazz about talking about where you from. New York Shit. Basically, some songs like New York Shit, Touch It, and In the Ghetto are all some ones to kind of have for repping New York and having some New York pride and East Coast pride as far as that pitch kind of happens. These are just some good highlighted ones. Definitely the concept. I mean, this album at least went gold, I'd have to say, so it's a good concept. This at least kind of somewhat stood a chance compared to some of the albums that were dominant in like 2005, 2006 with like D. Pharrell and Dem Franchise Boys and T.I. and Young Jock and some of those type folks. But I still would have to say this is a pretty good concept to get some of this, because Busta Rhymes is pretty lyrical. He's definitely someone that kept it alive, and in his singles off this this particular album. He just did a good. He just did. Busta Rhymes definitely held his own in this particular market when folks thought that hip hop was dead in 2006 and stuff. So it's a good concept if you do miss like that lyrical rap from like 2005, 2006, things like that. I'd have to suppose. But to talk about some of the songs I recommend on here, basically out of 15 songs, I wound up recommending to you 11. So basically, the 11 songs I recommend would be Touch It, I Love My Bitch, How We Do It Over Here, New York Shit, Been Through the Storm, Cocaina, They're Out to Get Me, Gold Mine, You Can't Hold the Torch, In the Ghetto, and Get You Some. So, talk about some of these, like basically another Commerce song that's really good is Cocaine. I definitely enjoyed this one. This is like a good New York sounding Dr. Dre beat, I'd have to suppose. This is just some Cocaine is like a good New York sounding Dr. Dre beat, I'd have to suppose. It's like a brunch time traffic city commerce of a song I would definitely feel like. And this is just some city commerce and early out and this is just some city commerce and early errands outing of a song, I'd have to say. So it's a pretty good highlighted one. This is definitely a great Dr. Dre. This is definitely a very excellent Dr. Dre beat. This really works for like some city fair as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. This really feels like some bustle like the New York type fair, Philadelphia type fair, some places like that as far as that pitch kind of happens. It's a real nice highlighted one, different from Dr. Dre's normal sound. There are some Dr. Dre beats on here that don't work quite as well, like Don't Get Carried Away, but this is definitely a pretty good example one. This has a beautiful hook on there, definitely some good background vocals as far as that pitch kind of particularly kind of happens with it. Definitely appreciate the concepts. Marsha Ambrosius is on this particular song, and she does a pretty good job with this particular pitch of helping Busta Rhymes out. It's a pretty good concept to kind of get this one. This is definitely good for some brunch time traffic, like I was saying. Good concept to kind of get this particular type fair. Just works as a good sense as far as that. Yeah, it's just some good city bustle, I'd have to suppose. Real good for like blue collar type makeshift just within the pitch. That it's an easy kind of highlight. This one just has pretty Afrobeat. I mean, it's just more low key, not quite as carnivorous as like Touch It and How We Do It Over Here and I Love My Bitch and some of those type ones, but it's just a pretty affable one. Good concept to kind of get this particular one. One of the best beats on the album would have to be How We Do It Over Here with Missy Elliott. This is just a shredding kind of Dr. Dre beat. I would definitely say this is one of the album's best songs, like I was saying. I just would feel like this is just one of the album's best songs, I would definitely feel like. And this is just a ballistic kind of nightclub craze of song, definitely. It's just an overall pretty festive song. So this just has a completely shredding beat. This is one of the best Dr. Dre beats I've heard out of the 2000s as far as that pitch kind of happens. This is up there with some of his relapse beats that he did for Eminem, some stuff like that. Some of those particular type pitches, definitely just some real supreme type energy that just really holds its own, and it's just one of the best songs out of just some real supreme type energy that holds its own. Is one of the best songs on the album, I'd have to say. Definite highlight. Been Through the Storm is a pretty highlighted one. Been Through the Storm with Stevie Wonder is a pretty highlighted one. This is definitely like a malign, kind of moody morning malaise of a song. I would definitely have to feel like this is just some good Starbucks traffic type tune in the big. This is definitely some good Starbucks traffic in like a big city sense, I'd have to say. And this is just a pretty groovy song. So this one's pretty melodic. Stevie Wonder does a pretty great job with this particular one. This is another one that's similar to Cocaine and New York Shit, I'd have to suppose. Just some good highlights to kind of get these particular ones. Another one that's kind of like that is They're Out to Get Me. These are just some highlighted ones, but definitely I would feel like New York Shit, Been Through the Storm. I would definitely have to say that New York Shit, Been Through the Storm, and Cocaine are all some good morning commerce as far as that pitch kind of happens. Just some great brunch time commerce for getting bagels and coffee, things like that. Panera Bread, some of those type places. Just some good concepts to kind of get some of those, definitely would feel like. Gold Mine's a pretty highlighted one. Definitely like this one. This has Raekwon on there. This is a pretty nice one. This is like a typical kind of late 90s, almost Wu-Tang like East Coast hit, I'd have to say. This is very noir-like and dramatic. This is very noir-like and has dramatics about it, I have to suppose. It's like a late day kind of after hours jam. Yeah, Goldmine is definitely good for some late day after hours, after 7:30 p.m., something like that, as the sun's starting to set. This would have to say within that particular pitch, just a good highlight to kind of get there. Definitely reminds me of like some, I would say some after hours kind of errand running, some stuff like that. Just kind of a malaise of like the evening fair as far as that pitch kind of happens. This one's not quite as makeshift or blue collar, but just kind of has the pitch of just like standard activities, maybe getting ready to hang out with your buds, something like that. Just kind of sip beers, watch football, something that sort of pitch, just in a more kind of just less frivolous kind of sense. This is probably one of the more serious songs on the album, kind of like Don't Get Carried Away and some of those type ones. Just a good pitch to kind of get that, but this is more of like typical kind of East Coast fare. You Can't Hold the Torch is a pretty highlighted one. This is a Jay Dilla beat, I would have to say. This is a pretty nice one. This is a woozy kind of Smoke a Few gem. This is a woozy kind of Smoke a Few gem, I'd have to say. This is like a malaise kind of really getting stuck kind of hangout hit, I would definitely feel like. And this is just good for some social kind of ruminating. So it's not just an isolated kind of ruminating where it's just you by yourself. I'd say this is good for some social kind of ruminating, or just kick back and really getting stuck, smoking, getting some smokage, having some songs played, some stuff like that. Just as far as that pitch kind of happens, it's a real nice highlight one for like some penthouse music and stuff like that. Definitely good on like the East Coast type fare. Reminds me of something that Raekwon would have done like back in the mid 90s, something like that. Get You Some is a pretty good highlight. This is like a creeping kind of nightclub haze of a song. I would definitely feel like this is some good outing fare in a more shrill sense, I would have to suppose. And this has just got a dramatic pitch, and this song just delivers. This dramatic pitch of this song delivers pretty well, I'd have to say. So this is a pretty highlighted one. This is another Dr. Dre beat. This one just works pretty well. This is a very creeping type song. This really has like an almost movie-like kind of just real. This one just has a real cinematic type feel, just in a more haunting and dark kind of sense, I'd have to suppose. This real nice shrill type one to kind of get within that particular pair. Just a nice highlighted one. This is kind of some more city type music, but it just works in like, I mean, I can see this being like a nightclub song in a sense, just something to kind of have when things get a little bit more dramatic and a little bit more just overall shrieking, like just within the pitch, and just having something a little bit more alarming and hair raising. I'd have to suppose was a pretty good concert to get this one. It's not too many nightclub songs to kind of have this particular pitch just within that particular aspect. So this is a good highlighted one, and the fact that Busta Rhymes can get a good Dr. Dre beat like this really kicks ass. So it's a good concept here. They're Out to Get Me is another highlighted one. This has Mr. Porter on there. They're Out to Get Me is like some out and about kind of city makeshift malaise. I'd have to say this is like some 3 o'clock p.m., 4 o'clock p.m. traffic and commute, I'd have to suppose. And this is just good for like a late day kind of stroll. So I definitely appreciate this particular concept. This is a little bit more malaise type one compared to some of the stuff like some of these other ones like New York Shit, Been Through the Storm, and Cocaine are more morning commerce and brunch commerce, I'd have to suppose. About this particular one, They're Out to Get Me is just kind of more 3 o'clock. They're Out to Get Me is more 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock p.m. type malaise. Just got done with work, some pitches like that. Just kind of more wind down type music, or just like the standard malaise of just like evenings and sunsets as far as that pitch kind of happens. Just getting like some Subway, something like that. Just kind of cool off type factor type music, I'd have to suppose. Pretty good highlight one. There is some paranoia on this particular song, but I do like the concept of it. It's just an extra kind of characteristic from Busta Rhymes as far as that pitch kind of happens, helps fill out the album, I'd have to say. So it's a good concept there. But to talk about the 4 songs I didn't recommend, I basically felt like Don't Carried Away was just not enough of a highlighted beat. This was a Dr. Dre beat, but it just didn't really suit the album as far as the pitch kind of happened. This one was a little bit too I feel like Don't Get Carried Away was just a little bit too cinematic. Just didn't really match the rest of the theme of this particular album, just the overall execution of how it particularly kind of happens. So it's just kind of strange just because for the most part, usually Dr. Dre has some of the best beats on a particular artist album, but this was just an example of one that just was not fitting enough for this particular project. It was just a little bit too dramatic and cinematic for it. Just the pitch of it was just not that compelling. Get Down was just a clumsy kind of Timbaland beat. This was trying to be like another club type bop similar to Touch It, but just didn't really nail it that well. I'll Do It All was just kind of a clumsy, kind of soulful type tune. I did like Latoya Williams' soulful singing on the song, but just wasn't catchy enough to really have that compellingness. It was just kind of a poor lady song as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. And then Legend of the Falls was just kind of Legend of the Falls was another too cinematic song that just didn't pull off the vibe that well. It was just trying to be like a horror. The song was just trying to be like a horrorcore type song, but it just didn't really fit the vibe that well in terms of the pitch that I was trying to deliver upon. Just it was not a good execution of particularly doing it. It was just kind of one. I mean, it was a creative song. I definitely feel like was just not that really compelling in terms of like a horrorcore type pitch. I just felt like it kind of felt like an underdeveloped one for Busta Rhymes as far as that pitch kind of happened with it. But that's the concept about this album. So me recommending basically 11 songs out of 15 on here. I'm gonna go ahead and give this album like a 9.25 out of 10. It's pretty good. Definitely filled with quality, plenty of hit songs on here. Maybe it's kind of light on like overall nightclub type moments, but it does have a lot. Maybe it's kind of light on nightclub moments and overall outing fare. But I would definitely have to say for a commerce album, I would have to say for a commerce album, just in terms of morning, afternoon, and evening commerce, there's definitely a good assortment of hits on this particular album that just have that particular fare. So it's just pretty much like a New York kind of weaving through the city, building stuff like that. Just whether on foot or in a car or something like that. Just those particular pitches, just kind of being out and about in some of the bustles. Just very much like a commerce kind of album, just a standard kind of blue collar just sense or white collar kind of sense, just within the fashion, just standard traverse just through city life as far as that pitch kind of happens, especially like in the summertime, just getting hot dogs and Subway and stuff like that. Just some of those type pitches, just standard kind of out and about. I mean, there are some nightclub songs on here like Get You Some and How We Do It Over Here and Touch It and some of those type ones, but they're just kind of kept like a relative minimum. And I feel like definitely it could have used another song. I definitely think this album could have used some more ringtone bounce of like a song like I Love My Bitch. That's definitely kind of an oddball song on this particular album, and even Busta Rhymes himself said that as well. So it's kind of the concept about it. But I would have to say 9.25 score. The social score, that's kind of tricky. I think I'm going to give the social score like a 7 out of 10 because it does have some highlights on here. It does have some good commerce, but it's just kind of, I mean, Busta Rhymes' energy is pretty affable. He's a pretty catchy dude and infectious, I'd have to suppose. So it's just kind of the concept of just being able to say that not all these songs on here are really meant for your butt and stuff like that. I feel like some songs like You Can't Hold the Torch, I Love My Bitch, Touch It, Get You Somehow, We Do It Over Here. Some of those type ones definitely have some good highlights just within a standard. But a lot of this is just a lot more just blue collar, get to work, just kind of in your tape deck on your way to work, stuff like that, or on the way home. Something as far as that pitch kind of happens with this. Just kind of the concept of this is a lot more straightforward. I almost feel like giving it a 6.5 social. I'll just give it a 7 just because this is a pretty quality album. Does have the hits on here. Maybe some folks would like Don't Get Carried Away just because it has Nas on there, some stuff like that. So there are some decent ones. There's at least one smoking song on here in the form of You Can't Hold the Torch. So it's a good concept to kind of get some of these. And oh yeah, In the Ghetto is a pretty good social highlight too. That's a good night kind of stepping this night traverse and residential snackage type songs. That's another good highlight. So that's kind of the concept about it. But in terms of the future, like Busta Rhymes, he dropped an album like in 2020, and maybe he dropped an album in 2022. I know he's dropped a few recent projects, I'd have to suppose. It's kind of the concept about it. We'll have to get to some more of these, but this is definitely a pretty damn near classic album, I have to say. Definitely impactful. Had some great Dr. Dre beats, some stuff like that, some Swizz Beats production, some Timbaland type fare, even though I didn't recommend his beat. Jay Dilla's on here, some stuff like that. It's just a real relevant East Coast album to 2006 when they were just doing a lot worse. But it's just kind of a concept. This is definitely a pretty heralded album that I highly recommend.